Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Spider-Man No Way Home has now made $1 billion. I'm so happy that this movie is doing really well. It really deserves it. It's a great movie, and maybe this means that theaters are going to go back to normal sometime soon because we have a big movie making a ton of money, and it's only been like 10-11 days since the movie came out, and the fact that this movie made that much money in just 11 days is just crazy and mind-blowing to me. And also, because it happened during a pandemic, and that's just great because I'm pretty sure this is the movie that made $1 billion fastest other than Avengers Endgame, because Avengers Endgame, that's just a big movie, so it makes sense that that's the one that made it fastest. But I think after Avengers Endgame, it's this one in 11 days, so I'm so happy that this movie is doing well, and I really hope that it actually is able to make even more money because it really does deserve it. Anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Today I want to rank every single Spider-Man movie from the worst to the best, including the Venom films and of course Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, before I share my ranking, guys, keep in mind that this is just my personal opinion. Your opinion's obviously going to be different, so let me know down in the comments, how would you rank all the Spider-Man and Venom films? I'd love to know your thoughts. With that said, I'm going to get started, and at last place for me is going to be Spider-Man 3. This is a movie that I think has some really good ideas. I just don't think they're executed that well in the movie itself. A big reason for that is, even though it has some good ideas, there's just too many ideas. The movie has way too much stuff going on, and because they're not all connected, and because all of them are like separate plot lines, the movie just feels like a mess a lot of the time. You also have 3 different villains with 3 different motivations and 3 different, just completely different plot lines. And because the movie is trying to juggle all of them at the same time and lead to a satisfying conclusion, it's just not able to deliver on that. Now, like I said, the movie does have some good ideas. I do really like what they were trying to do with Green Goblin, or Harry Osborn's Green Goblin. And at the end of the movie, when he becomes a good guy, and it just pays off really nicely. I really like pretty much the entire third act of this film. I do like generally what they were trying to go for Sandman, with him being a more like grounded villain and him just wanting to take care of his daughter, and I really like that. And because they bring back the whole Uncle Ben's death thing and they are trying to do multiple villains at the same time, it just doesn't work really well. And of course, with Venom, you have just this plotline that's just really weird, and I don't really like where it goes with Bully Maguire, who, by the way, is hilarious. He's funny. I love seeing Bully Maguire. Just makes me laugh a lot, but it's cringy. It doesn't help the movie in any way. It's just good for memes. So for that reason, this movie just has too much to do. And even though I do think the third act is quite good, and I do really enjoy some of the ideas here, and as you go into the ending, I do think it's a pretty satisfying conclusion for the trilogy as a whole. But for the movie itself, I just think it's a mess, and I do wish that they were able to juggle all of these different things better. And number 10 is a movie that I personally think is a little overhated, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is a movie that I don't love. I used to when I first saw it as a kid, but now I think it's an okay movie. I think it's a pretty enjoyable film with some things that definitely work quite well. Now, the movie does have a lot of the same issues that Spider-Man 3 does. Multiple plot lines, and in the third act, they try to bring all of it together, but it doesn't work out that well. And because of that, I do think this movie suffers from a lot of the same things that Spider-Man 3 does, but I do think that this movie has better just sequences and moments and more well-constructed plot lines compared to Spider-Man 3. For example, what they do with Gwen Stacy's and Peter's relationship, although I do think it's a little weird with him stalking her and stuff, the way it's executed, their relationship, and just Emma Stone's and Andrew Garfield's performance is just perfect. And as you go into the third act with Gwen Stacy's death, it is just emotionally heartbreaking, and it leads to what I would say is one of the most emotional scenes in any comic book movie, and Andrew Garfield's performance in that scene is just perfect. I love a lot of the things that they do in this movie. The action is amazing. The web slinging, I think, is the best out of any Spider-Man movie, and the visual effects, all that stuff, I think work quite well. With the villains, I think Electro is not really good, but with Green Goblin, I think they had something going for him. Like in the first 2 acts, when we see him trying desperately to cure his illness and stuff, I think it's really good. But as you go into the third act, where he just becomes insane and starts killing Gwen Stacy and stuff, I don't think that works. But I think he had, like, in the first two acts, he had an interesting motivation. It just doesn't lead to anything that pays off really well. I was editing the video and didn't realize that I didn't talk about Rhino. What is with Rhino in this movie? He's such a weird character, and what they do with him is just does not work well at all. He's like a Russian gangster that gets a mech suit at the end of the movie, and his just over-the-top performance just never works for me. I'm also not a big fan of the way they make Peter the chosen one and how he's like the only Spider-Man that could ever exist. One thing that made Peter such a relatable character for a lot of people is because he could be anyone. He's just a random guy. And I think that's something that works really well for his character. But in this movie, because they made him the chosen one type thing, I don't think that works. With that being said, like I said, there's a lot of things in this movie that work really, really well. And Gwen Stacy's death, oh my god, that is just one of the most heartbreaking sequences in any comic book movie. And the action, the visual effects, the score by Hans Zimmer is also really good. So this movie has a lot of things going for it, but there's also a lot of problems that I have, which is why I can't put it higher on the list. Number 9 is Venom. This is a movie that I think is a ton of fun. It's not a really well-made movie. If you look at it from just a movie standpoint, it doesn't work that well, but it is highly entertaining, and every time I saw this movie, I just really, really enjoyed it. Tom Hardy is great in the lead role as Eddie, but he also voices Venom, and I think he's great as that too. And the action in the movie is actually really cool. The funny banter between Venom and Eddie works really, really well. What I think holds this one back from being higher is that, before Venom and Eddie meet, the movie is really slow and it drags a lot. And even some of the action, especially in the third act, I don't think is really good because you can't see what's going on because it's really dark, and you have two symbiotes fighting, which are both dark in color. So when they're fighting, you really can't see anything. But everything before that, I think, is actually really fun as far as the action goes. Now, I get that it's a stupid movie, and if this is your last place or second to last place, and if you just hate this movie, I get it. But to me, I find this really entertaining. And number 8 is Venom, Let There Be Carnage. What I think works about this movie is that it takes everything that worked about Venom, the first one, and puts it in here, and it doesn't do the stuff that doesn't work. And because this movie, we already have Venom and Eddie together, it's not really that slow. It's a movie that is really at its brisk pace, and it works really, really well. You obviously have a better villain than in the first film with Carnage, Cletus Cassidy, and the performance by Woody Harrelson is just a ton of fun. Now, he doesn't get a big motivation or anything, but because he's just a serial killer, he's just able to have a lot of fun with the character. And when Carnage shows up and Carnage and Venom have battles, this time you can actually see what's going on, and the fighting and the action is really, really cool to watch. The movie, again, also has a ton of funny moments with Eddie and Venom. Their banter is just perfect, and it is really, really entertaining to watch. And I do really, really enjoy this film. I think every single Spider-Man movie, I do somewhat enjoy. I just think that they have problems, and this one certainly has its problems. It's not a super well-made film. It does have quite a few issues, but to me, it's really entertaining, and that's honestly all I want from a Venom film. And number 7 is Spider-Man Far From Home. And I know a lot of people are going to have this movie even higher, but to me, I don't think I could put it quite as high as other people would. And the big reason for that is that I don't think it really works that well as a Spider-Man movie. I think it works really well as just a high school road trip type film. And I think it works really well as an MCU film because it's kind of comes after Avengers Endgame, and it's like an epilogue, and it works quite well as that. But I think as a Spider-Man movie, I don't think I could put this movie quite as high as I would as just a MCU movie or just a fun high school movie. Now, I will say, I think over Spider-Man Homecoming, this one has much better action. Spider-Man Homecoming, as much as I love the movie, it doesn't have that great of action sequences, but this movie has incredible action sequences, and they're great to watch, especially with Mysterio, where you go into his illusion sequences. They're so cool to watch, and I watch those scenes on repeat quite a bit. This is also a very rewatchable movie because it's just fun. It's just fun to watch, and I really enjoy that about it. I also really enjoy the way the movie shows Tony's death, how that has impacted Peter and even the rest of the world, and it's really emotional at times, and I think that's really nice. Where I think this movie has problems is pretty much the main plot. The whole thing with the Edith glasses just doesn't work for me because I don't think someone like Tony Stark would give They edit glasses to someone like Peter, who's very irresponsible, and throughout the entire movie, you see that he pretty much does not deserve those glasses because he makes a ton of mistakes. And because of that, I think the movie has issues. And even with Mysterio, he's like, there's a ton of villains in the MCU already that are motivated because of Tony Stark, and Mysterio is another one of those, and because of that, that doesn't work for me. Now, I think Jake Gyllenhaal is great. His performance is fantastic. Like I said, he's great in the action sequences as well, and he's really fun and charismatic to watch. It's just that I think we've seen the whole Tony Stark thing a lot of times in previous MCU movies, and seeing that here again, I didn't really need to see that. But as a whole, it's still a really fun movie, and I like rewatching it quite a bit. Number 6 is The Amazing Spider-Man. This is a movie that honestly has grown on me quite a bit. I enjoyed it at first, but now I actually think it's a great film. A big reason for that is Andrew Garfield. He is great as Peter Parker in honestly both the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and even in this one, he just gives such a fun performance, and seeing his origin story is great. And even in this movie, what I like is that we get to see more of Peter Parker as like just being really smart. So we see a lot of like how he's kind of a nerd and how he's really smart and kind of helps out Lizard in finding a cure and stuff. And I think that works really nicely. And even Lizard as a villain, I like his like the way he turns into a villain. He's just someone that wants to fix his hand, but that leads him into conducting experiments on himself, which turns him into a lizard. And although I think it's kind of repetitive from the other Spider-Man movies, I think it's a pretty good way to turn him into a villain. But I do have an issue with like in the third act where his motivation is just turning everyone in the city into lizards. I don't think that works, but as a whole, he's just a pretty interesting enough villain that works well throughout the entire film. The movie also has some really, really heroic moments where, especially where Peter is saving the little kid on the bridge. I love that scene. I think it's really nicely done. And the action and web slinging, the cinematography, all of that is also really, really cool to watch. So for all those reasons, I think this movie is very underappreciated. I personally really enjoy it. Before I give you guys my top 5, let me know down in the comments, how would you guys rank all the Spider-Man movies? And of course, where does Spider-Man No Way Home land on your ranking? Also, if you end up enjoying this video, be sure to hit the like button. It really does help me out, and I really, really do appreciate it. With that said, let's continue. And number 5 is the original Spider-Man. This is a movie that I think still holds up really, really well. Now, there's things about it that don't hold up quite as well, but as a whole, the movie really does work. First off, it's just a really nice, simple version of Peter Parker's origin story, and it does a really good job of showing that. I think it just does a perfect job of showing Tobey Maguire in the role. I think he's really good as just this awkward teenager, and I think that works really well. Although I do think he's not that great in the suit when he's quipping and stuff, it still works well enough, so I enjoy him in the role. I think Sam Raimi's direction is really, really cool. And the story itself, where you see him like learn the lesson of with great power comes great responsibility, and when he turns into Spider-Man, it pays off really nicely. And as you go into the third act with the villain, and because they've been setting up Green Goblin as this great villain, and also Willem Dafoe's performance in this movie is so good. When you see him in the third act fighting against Spider-Man, it's just a great fight. It's brutal and it works really, really nicely. And it's just small in scale. Whereas the future movies kind of blow everything out of proportion, here it's more small scale, more personal. And for that reason, I think it works really well. Now, there's certainly things that are cheesy and corny and don't hold up to today's standards. And I get that. I get it if you have a problem with that. But to me, that doesn't bug me too much. I think as a whole, this is still a fantastic origin story for Spider-Man. And number 4 is Spider-Man Homecoming. I love this movie. The first time I saw it, I loved it, and every single time I've seen it since then, I love it. Part of me wanted to put it higher, but I think the movies higher are slightly better, so I couldn't put this in my top 3. But still, this movie just does a great job of showing Tom Holland as Spider-Man, because you have him. I think he's perfect as both Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and he just fits the role really nicely. And because it's more of a high school movie, it's really, really enjoyable to watch. And I think every single time I see this, that's the part that's really charming. Because it's a high school movie, you get to see more of the high school side of Peter Parker, and I really enjoy seeing that. I know a lot of people have a problem with the whole Iron Man Jr. thing, with Iron Man showing up and giving him lessons and stuff. To me, honestly, no, I enjoy seeing Iron Man in the role, and he's not even in the movie all that much. I get that his presence is felt throughout the whole movie, and if you have a problem with that, I understand, I respect that, but to me, it works. I do really enjoy seeing Iron Man, and I do think seeing him as kind of a mentor to Peter, I think works. The movie is also really, really funny and rewatchable, just like Spider-Man Far From Home. Obviously, you have Ned in the movie, who's just really, really fun to watch. And because he's Peter's best friend, he does get a lot of screen time, and seeing both of them together is just a ton of fun. And of course, Michael Keaton as Vulture is a fantastic villain. He's one of my favorite Spider-Man villains, and he's just a really fun villain as well, because you see him as the fun dad, because in the movie, he's Liz's dad, and when you see him as that character, and the reveal happens, it's just really scary. And the scene in the car where he's threatening Peter is so well done. I love Michael Keaton's performance as Walter in this movie. And he's also not someone that's trying to blow up the city or anything. He's just trying to provide for his family. So also for that reason, he's just a really understandable, he just has a really understandable motivation. And he's a really good villain for that reason. Now, before I actually go into my top three, I just want to say I think all three of these movies are fantastic. I love all three of them. And honestly, they're pretty interchangeable for me because they're top tier comic book movies in my opinion. And even before, like right before hitting record on this video, I did debate switching them out. But as of right now, this is my ranking for the top three Spider-Man movies. Kicking off my top three is the latest Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man No Way Home. This is a movie that I went in with sky-high expectations, and I just fell in love with it. If you haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home yet, what are you doing? Just go watch it. But also, spoilers in 3, 2, 1. And this movie was just fantastic. It's fan service, it's filled with fan service, and it's just great. Seeing Tobey, Andrew, and Tom Holland together as Spider-Man on screen is just fantastic to watch. It's entertaining, and it's just amazing when they show up and you see them together on screen, having banter and fighting the villains. And it is so fan servicey, but it's also executed so well that even if they're not in the movie, the movie's still going to be good, but because they're in it, you have all these fun moments with them interacting, and you see the continuation of Tobey and Andrew's characters, who they stopped being Spider-Man a long time ago, but when they show up here, it is just so satisfying. And as you go into the third act, when they're all fighting the villains together, it is just fantastic to watch. Also, when they're talking about the different villains that they fought and the organic webs that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man has, it is funny and it works so well in my opinion. And every single time I think about the movie, it just gets better and better. You also have the villains from previous Spider-Man movies returning, and that is fun to watch as well. And Green Goblin, oh my god, he's so good in this movie. Willem Dafoe, I think he's even better in this movie than in the original Spider-Man. And after watching this movie, he became my favorite Spider-Man villain, and surpassing Doc Ock and Vulture, so I think he is just fantastic. The movie also manages to have a lot of emotional moments, especially with Aunt May's death. It is just heartbreaking, and because here you have her, kind of the Uncle Ben type character, where she gives Peter the lesson, great power comes great responsibility, and it leads to just a satisfying origin story for Peter Parker, because we just assumed that before Spider-Man Homecoming, that was when this Peter's origin story happened, the whole great power comes great responsibility thing. But we realized that all three of these movies have been Peter's origin story: Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home. And in a lot of ways, this movie even makes the previous two movies even better. So for those reasons, I think this movie is, like I said, one of the best Spider-Man movies. Now, I've only seen it once. I've seen the rest of these movies multiple times, but this is the one I've seen only once. So as I rewatch it and think about it more, I might move it higher or lower. But as of right now, it's at number 3, and I just love this movie so much. Another thing I think No Way Home does really well is that, like, when you have Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 that have, like, too many villains, and because of that, the movie feels like it has too much going on. With No Way Home, this movie also has a lot of villains. It also has more than one hero, so it should, technically, after watching Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2, it should technically have a ton of problems because of that. But what I think this movie does really well is that all the villains that show up and all the heroes, they're all part of one storyline with the multiverse and stuff. So for that reason, even though this movie has quite a few villains and more than one hero, it's still able to feel like a cohesive movie with one focused plotline. So I really enjoy that. Our runner-up is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This movie to me was such a pleasant surprise. I went in with really low expectations, but once I saw it, oh my god, I fell in love with it, and every time I've rewatched it, I just loved it more and more. The animation style is cool and very unique, and it's not anything like I've seen before. It's like straight out of a comic book where you're seeing the animation. It's really cool to watch, and because it's so unique, it differentiates himself from other comic book movies that are animated and just other animated movies in general. And whenever you say Spider-Man to the Spider-Verse, the animation style that pops into my head is so unique and different from anything else that it's just perfect. I also really enjoy seeing other Spider-Man interact, and because you have like 6 different Spider people in this movie, it's really cool to watch. And you also have a villain in Kingpin who's kind of understandable. He has an understandable motivation. He just wants his family back, and I love that about his character. It's also a really funny movie and just fun to watch in general. And what they do with Peter B. Parker, with him being like really depressed and stuff, and him by the end of it overcoming that and becoming Spider-Man, I think is great. And Miles Morales, of course, our main character here, is fantastic, and I think seeing his character arc throughout the movie is also great. I did debate putting this at number 1, but like I said, I debated all of my top 3, so it was really hard to put this one at number 2, but my number 1 I think is slightly better than this one. So coming in at first place is Spider-Man 2, the classic. A lot of people love this movie. A lot of people think it's the greatest comic book movie of all time for good reason. I think this movie is fantastic. Sam Raimi follows up Spider-Man 1 with a movie that makes that movie even better, but this movie is just even better than the first one, and it's a sequel that just builds upon what the original already did, and it just does a perfect job of capturing Peter Parker as a character. I really like the way it shows both the high school side and the Spider-Man side of Peter Parker, and in the middle of the movie where he just quits being Spider-Man, I think is actually really nice. Now, I do think, I do have a problem with the whole thing that he lost his powers. I don't think that's really well done. But when he does give up being Spider-Man, but he realizes the city needs him and comes back, I think that works really nicely. The movie also has spectacular action sequences with Doc Ock, and Doc Ock is just such a great villain that even in Spider-Man No Way Home, they heavily marketed him in the trailers and the posters. So that explains how big of a mark that Doc Ock made on people, because he's just such a fantastic villain. And of course, Alfred Molina, his performance is just fantastic. And of course, this movie also has one of the best comic book movie sequences just in general. With the train sequence in the movie, it is so cool. It is just one of the coolest just moments and action sequences in any comic book movie, even to date. So it is really, really great. I also love the way the movie kind of gives a redemption arc to Doc Ock, that in the third act, he actually kind of becomes a good guy and saves the city from his son thing. And it's really, really nice. And when you see him show up back in No Way Home, it's even better because he's just such a great villain. And when I saw him in No Way Home, I really loved it. And I think No Way Home even made him a better character. And watching this movie is just even elevated, just the experience of watching it, because of No Way Home. And I think this movie in and of itself is just fantastic because it has a great story, great characters, a great villain, and just some of the best action sequences in any comic book movie. So for me, Spider-Man 2 comes in at number 1. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. Let me know down in the comments again, how would you rank all the Spider-Man movies? And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button. It really, really helps me out, and I really appreciate it. And subscribe to my channel for more content like this. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.